One of the dangers of dedicating so much time to something, learning so much about it, is that you may just stumble on the fact that the whole thing is a lie. Then, you have to take a look at the world, the field, and even yourself differently. And you might not like what you see in that dark mirror. I know the news is all abuzz about how the rule of law is collapsing all around us. This act or that act has destroyed the rule of law. But that's part of the illusion. You see, this is a multi-millennial, cross-cultural, ubiquitous problem, which is a stupendously pretentious way of saying it's a human problem. But we've been fed a steady diet of, it's okay so long as it only happens to them. Which is only okay until it happens to you. As we look outside and see the facade of the entire system crumbling in front of us, I see some folks shouting that the courts will save us. But buddy, the courts are a part of that system. The part that keeps us in line in the first place. In 2008, Will Foster had a legal medical cannabis garden outside of his home in California that was raided by the Sonoma County Sheriff's Department. He had been arrested in 1995 in Oklahoma on a trumped-up methamphetamine search warrant for growing his own cannabis to help with his arthritis. Facing a plea deal that would give him 20 years in prison and his wife, who had nothing to do with the garden, 5 years, he opted to go to trial so that his wife wouldn't face jail time. He was sentenced to 93 years in prison as a first-time, nonviolent offender. In 2008, the new year starts with the stock market plummeting. Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, and Merrill Lynch are all facing bankruptcy. Some are saved, some are not. Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson is overseeing the critical failure of the U.S. economy and, along with the Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke, believes that if Congress doesn't pass what is at this point the second stimulus attempt, the U.S. and the world will fall into a recession. This $700 billion Wall Street bailout is signed into law by President Bush. In 2008, the culmination of a 3-year investigation is approaching. Since 1996, women have reported one Jeffrey Epstein to various law enforcement agencies about illicit activities involving underage women. Epstein routinely donated tens of thousands of dollars to the Palm Beach Police Department. In 2005, women started reporting that underage girls were being coerced into committing sexual acts for Epstein. The Palm Beach Police Department set up an investigation of Epstein's home and found dozens and dozens of underage girls had received money for sexual acts. The girls state to the police that they had told Epstein their ages. The rule of law is like what Gandhi said about Western civilization. I think it would be a very good idea. When you look up definitions of what the rule of law is, you get a couple of elements of what it should contain. We can start with how the United Nations outlines it. The rule of law means that in governance, all people, institutions, and even the state itself are accountable to laws that are publicly known, equally enforced, and protect the rights and fundamental freedoms of the people. Publicly known is somewhat tricky. I'm pretty sure that most folks know that stealing is a crime, and if they don't, it's something you can look up on a governmental website, or even look up the criminal code at a library. Theft is outlined in the Texas Penal Code, Title 7, Chapter 31. But how about who's at fault in a car accident? Do you know how that's determined? Do you know that it's different in different states in the United States? Or how about attractive nuisance? And no, that wasn't my nickname in high school. It's an actual legal theory. And if you look up the Texas Civil Practice and Remedies Codes, it's only mentioned 6 times, and each time it tells you that in this specific situation it does not apply. It doesn't actually explain what it is. I mean, that's part of the reason why attorneys exist. That's what we're trained to know. And equally enforced? We can see that's not the case from the examples above. But if that doesn't convince you, then just look at Trump versus the United States. The president is apparently immune from criminal liability for official acts while in office. The Supreme Court just said that the law does not apply to this one person. Not that this is a special exception. The law loves an exception. You cannot kill someone unless it's self-defense. That's the exception. The court decision was a blanket immunity to the justice system. But it was a rule made by the courts, and it is now law. A law that violates the rule of law, because a person with blanket immunity from the criminal justice system means that part of the 3 things in that definition about protecting people's rights and fundamental freedoms, well, that just doesn't apply when someone can just do that legally. What's the point?
Will Foster battled the Oklahoma courts for years. His arthritis, now untreated in prison, did irreparable harm to the joints in his hands. He spent his time in the library, appealing his case through the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals. In a vote of 4-3, they upheld his conviction, but reduced his sentence from 93 years to 20. After having the governor of Oklahoma deny his parole twice, he is released in 2001 on the condition that he leaves Oklahoma. He then goes to California. The economy is reeling. Stock markets worldwide are crashing with their worst numbers in history. The International Monetary Fund warns the entire worldwide financial system is on the brink. Various companies like Goldman Sachs and American Express are now labeling themselves as bank holding companies due to the fact that the FDIC would then insure them, finding a nice loophole for protection. In Greece, riots begin as the markets collapse, and a 15-year-old child is shot and killed by a police officer. That police officer is given a life sentence. Epstein was previously arrested for solicitation in 2006. He was out on bond soon after. He assembled a defense team of lawyers that included famed attorneys like Roy Black, Gerard Lefcourt, the Harvard law professor and Trump defense attorney Alan Dershowitz, and Ken Starr. Google these names. They are among the most famous attorneys in the legal field at the time.
Ben Robbins is one of those folks who have been challenging the form of tabletop RPGs for the past 2 decades. While most of the folks playing RPGs are kind of stuck in this sword and sorcery genre, rolling dice, pushing minis, he's been challenging the fundamentals of what a role-playing game is. Now, I'm not saying he's the only one, or even the first one to do this, but he is one of the more famous folks pushing those boundaries. In December of 2025, he released Rules of Law. This game has no dice, no minis, no cards, and there's no game master. All of those things that we usually associate with role-playing games are missing. In it, you play as... well, it's kind of hard to say. Are you members of council, representations of political factions, or anthropomorphized spirits of abstract concepts? What it boils down to is you and your group of 3 to 4 people are here to decide what kind of society you want to be, and you establish how crime and punishment function in your society. You take a general law, and then start to get specific with the situation. Something that either prohibits or requires action. You and the group break down what happens to people who violate this law. How is it enforced? Are there levels of severity? Is this a just law in your society? It is a game that makes you think, like really think, about the values of a society. What's important to the people making these laws? And do those values align with the people for whom the laws apply? And that's the beauty of the game. It makes you think about what the law is, how a society creates laws and deems to punish them. It puts into the forefront the idea that the law is a social construct. Now, I know that that word has a certain connotation for so many people, but for the law, it's kind of undeniable. It is a social construct in a very literal interpretation of those words. Like, have you seen those funny, obscure law posts and memes around, like how it's illegal to mispronounce Arkansas in Arkansas, or how it's illegal for a minor to play pinball in South Carolina? These laws are specific to those specific places because the people in those societies deem it important enough to put it into the law. RPGs can be a great tool to make you think about something you probably wouldn't think about ordinarily. Now think about those cases from 2008. What values do you see in Will Foster's case? What's the core principle being upheld by now allowing a person to grow cannabis in their home? You can talk about the avoidance of intoxication. Recreational drugs may be something that you oppose. I don't use cannabis, but I've seen folks use it and I've never really seen it harm anyone. I can't say the same thing for alcohol, a substance that I do occasionally partake in. But one of those is broadly legal, and the other one is still outlawed in the United States. And yes, while it may be legal in some states even to use recreationally, federally it's still against the law, though usually the law is not enforced in states where it is legal. Who is being protected by this law? What is it designed to do? And that 93-year sentence, does that punishment feel like justice to you? The nature of the game presses you on this, because you can't fall back on the cliche, he broke the law, he should have known. Because you are the ones making the law. You are the ones setting the punishment. So we're not in the arena of the population complying with the law yet. We're not asking the question of why someone would break the law in the books. You are the book. Why are you making this law? Why are you setting that punishment? We don't seem to ask ourselves these questions generally because they're not easy to answer. We feel powerless to change these laws, so we sit back in the seemingly easy position of simply complying or not complying and laying the blame on those who can't follow the rules. But the question we should be asking when it comes to these laws is, why are they the rules in the first place? So it's difficult in the United States to have an honest discussion about the unequal application of the law without bringing up the criminalization of being black in the US. Some keen observers may have noticed that the stories that I brought up in the beginning of the video all pertain to white people being charged or not charged with a crime. That's because when you get into the racial statistics, it becomes hilariously obvious that there is a huge racial bias in law enforcement. And by hilarious, I mean you kind of have to laugh at it because of the absurdity of it, or you just cry at the injustice. There are common statistics that point to this, like how black people are many times more likely to be arrested over marijuana possession, even though marijuana usage is very close to identical across ethnic groups. While most recent studies show that African Americans are slightly more likely to use marijuana as a percentage than whites, this doesn't account for the 3 to 5 times more likely they are to be arrested for possession. And the unequal application and use of drug laws is not a bug. It's a full-blown feature. Famously, John Erlichman, who served as White House counsel and assistant to the president on domestic affairs during the Nixon administration, said why Nixon criminalized drugs as he did in a 1994 interview.
The Nixon campaign in 1968, and the Nixon White House after that, had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. John Erlichman, Nixon aide, and Watergate perpetrator.
The Civil Rights Act of 1964 clearly showed that you couldn't make laws that were racially motivated or discriminatory. So, the tactic changed to make laws that were objective and balanced on the surface, but racist and discriminatory in practice. Putting marijuana as a Schedule I drug was not a mistake. And there's something else that many folks who are not familiar with the law may not have realized with regards to why marijuana was a Schedule I drug. Possession of a Schedule I drug in any amount is a felony. Being convicted of a felony in the United States can lose you the right to vote. If you needed a visual aid to clarify why something like this would be so potent, how racialized this practice is, here's a map of the Confederate States of Here's a map of the states that allow for felony disenfranchisement in the US. So when Nixon makes marijuana a Schedule I drug and instructs law enforcement to start pushing for targeted enforcement, this is quite specific as a choice. Remember, he's targeting black communities and politically left-wing people. Those are the people who can't vote anymore. This creates a trickle-down effect on politics, altering the electorate in your favor by using the law as a tool. And let me be very clear, that's exactly what this is.
Never mistake law for justice. Justice is an idea, and law is a tool.
Ronald Reagan is a known racist. Or rather, for those who actually pay attention to what Reagan said and did, he's a known racist. There is a deliberate lack of bringing up this information for those who worship at the altar of Reagan. But we have recordings of him saying this to Nixon in 1971 when he was still governor of California.
And last night, I tell you, to watch that thing on television as I did, to see those monkeys from those African countries, damn them, they're still uncomfortable wearing shoes.
So, when Lee Atwater, who worked as an aide in the Reagan administration, said in a 1981 interview explaining how the Reagan administration would push racist policies into law, he practiced the tactic I stated before, altering the laws that look objective on paper, but discriminatory in practice.
Y'all don't quote me on this. You start out in 1954 by saying by 1968, you can't say that hurts you. Backfires. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. You're getting so abstract now that you're talking about cutting taxes, and all these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and a byproduct of them is that blacks get hurt, worse than whites. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we are doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me, because obviously sitting around saying we want to cut this is much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than So any way you look at it, race is coming on the back burner.
This is the key point to the Law and Order crowd. There's a reason why they push that. Because you can make all manner of evils palatable to a large population if you just sell it as part of the law. Then you can always fall back on the fact that the problem is with the folks not following the law. Because the law is the law, and the law is objective. The issue is always played onto the idea that these are just bad actors. Personal responsibility. Yet the most common correlation and causation to criminal behavior are always systemic issues. If I put two people in a locked room and place a knife in the center of the room, then state that only one of the people in the room is coming out alive, I can't be shocked if one person uses that weapon to harm the other. I created the scenario. I placed the people in it. Can I then fall back on personal responsibility? Well, it depends. If I place the person into that situation and I put a gun to their head and tell them, do this, or I pull the trigger, you could probably argue that, well, they had a lack of agency at that point and wouldn't be responsible for the crime. But if I place you in an intense, unrelenting poverty and take away all avenues of your ability to make an actual honest living,
and you steal some food or money, well, jail time for you. You should have known better. Whenever I see someone talking about CRT or the rejection of that theory, they talk about how discrimination is against the law since the Civil Rights Act of 1964. They're falling back on the false logic that something needed to be a prima facie discriminatory act, and that's the only way it can really be discriminatory. Prima facie is Latin for at first sight. Lawmakers, as we have seen, are keenly aware of this and realize very early on that if they just made the law do what they wanted it to do and add one layer of obfuscation, they felt that the average US citizen would not be clever enough to figure out that this whole point was racism. And everyone who repeats these ignorant talking points are proving them correct. And let us return to the rule of law. The rule of law is to make sure that the law has even application to all. But when the law itself is inherently imbalanced, do we come to the conclusion that the rule of law is being violated, or that the rule of law is working as intended? When we have discriminatory laws where the law is designed not to be balanced, does that violate the rule of law as a concept? If you pass laws that, as Lee Atwater would say, hurts white people, but are primarily designed to hurt black people, is the rule of law satisfied? There is an argument to say yes. But is it justice? No, of course not. But that isn't what I was asking. And that's the problem in a nutshell.
Growing medical cannabis was legal at the time in California, so the Sonoma County Sheriff's Department did not charge Will Foster with a crime. The state of Oklahoma requested and was granted the ability to extradite Foster back to Oklahoma. Foster was sent back to prison to serve out the remainder of the 7 years of his original sentence. While the release was denied twice by the Republican governor Frank Keating in the 90s, his release was granted in November of 2009 by a Democratic governor, Brad Henry. Foster returned to California. In 2015, his parole term finally ended. In the aftermath of what happened in the global recession, eyes would look towards our legal system to see what repercussions would be felt in the industry. But even with the rampant fraud and predatory banking practices that caused the crash, only one senior banker, whose role was negligible in the overall scheme of things, went to prison. The rest of the executives got bailouts and bonuses paid for by the US taxpayer. One very key reason for the paucity of criminal prosecutions that happened in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis is that what the banks were doing, what caused this entire mess, wasn't against the law. The United States prosecutor, Alexander Acosta, had a 53-page indictment made up by the U.S. Attorney's Office, with 60 counts listed against Epstein. If found guilty, Epstein could face life in prison. However, Acosta entered a non-prosecution agreement with Epstein that would have him serve only 13 months in jail for one count of solicitation of a minor. He registered as a sex offender and was ordered to pay restitution to 36 other victims. For this travesty of justice, Acosta was punished by receiving a cabinet position in the Trump administration as the Secretary of Labor, and now operates on the board of directors for a right-wing news media company, Newsmax. My favorite TV show is Babylon 5, which was a 1990s sci-fi television show based on the idea of what if Star Trek was a good show. In the season 3 episode 4 titled Passing Through Gethsemane, Brad Dourif of Chucky and Lord of the Rings fame plays a Trappist monk that arrives at the station. See, there's an order of Trappist monks that reside in this station and wish to engage with all the alien species to understand them and their interpretations of God. Brad Dourif's character is Brother Edward, a devout monk who is nonetheless riddled with visions. Are they hallucinations or memories? He can't say. When talking to one of the main characters on the show and being asked about what the defining moment of his religion is to him personally, the emotional core, he responds with a story of Jesus sitting in the Garden of Gethsemane. For those who are unaware, it's a story about Jesus questioning whether his fate of torture, crucifixion, and death was something that he must do. Jesus decides to stay and sacrifice himself for all of humanity. Brother Edward wonders if he would do the same thing if placed in that same scenario. In the world of Babylon 5, the death penalty has been abolished. So when someone, like a serial killer, commits their crimes, they face what is called the death of personality. The individual is mind-wiped, and they are given a new personality and a position to help society in some way as payment for their crimes. The memories Brother Edward is having are being triggered by the use of an alien telepath, by a relative of a victim that Brother Edward had when he was still Charles Dexter, the Black Rose killer. Eventually, Brother Edward knows the relative of the victim of his past crimes will come to kill him, and he stays and accepts his fate. Later, Brother Theo, who's the head of the Trappist monks on the station, welcomes a new member, a man named Brother Malcolm, a recently mind-wiped individual who killed Brother Edward, who had recently been tried, convicted, and sentenced to the same death of personality. What is the point of the criminal justice system? In legal theories, we generally have rehabilitation, deterrence, and retribution. Removing the religious element for a moment, as you may have your own thoughts this way or the other about Catholic monks, does this fit the bill as justice for the crime? Rehabilitation in the form of a new personality implanted by the government as something that it deems beneficial to society. Deterrence in the form of a punishment that scares people into not committing this most heinous of crimes. Punishment in a death that lacks the death of the body, but includes the death of the mind. Would this be an option for you to pick in your game of rules of law? Is this justice? If not, is spending the remainder of your days in a cell justice? Is execution justice? In the United States, we have a system that not only tries to be all three, but fails in each category. We have what some would call the highest recidivism rates in the world, although, admittedly, it's difficult to track this in much of the world. But we do track it in the United States, and the number is around 70%, which I would think is awful regardless of comparisons to other nations. If you're the victim of a crime, especially a violent crime, your first inclination might be something towards vengeance. Maybe something you would like to launder in terms like societal vengeance or punishment. But punishment doesn't really achieve the goals of rehabilitation or deterrence. For the National Institute of Justice, here in the United States, we know that research shows that punishment is not a deterrence. It just doesn't move the needle. Punishment also doesn't do anything to rehabilitate, so the individual, once released from prison, will generally just get reconvicted. Hence the recidivism rate's close to 70%. So, is it just punishment? Something that'll make us feel better? That person hurts us, so we're hurting them right back, but in a humane way. The uncomfortable thing is to get the best results so far as societal well-being, we're probably looking at rehabilitation. And that takes the shape of job training and support for convicts. And someone will argue that we are just supporting bad behavior because they go against society's rules and then they get rewarded for it? Well, for one, why are those opportunities not available to prevent the crime in the first place? And second, what else do you want to do? The United States has the largest prison population of any country in the world. And that's not per capita, by the way. That's just total. The prison population in the United States outnumbers China by over 100,000 people, and China's population is 4 times larger than the United States. We have double the number of the next highest country after China, which is Brazil. What we're doing isn't working. It's a structural issue related to so many things happening at the same time. Private prisons, targeted law enforcement on certain populations, and a criminal justice system focused on punishment above all else all contribute to the United States being at the top of a list we don't even want to be near. We seem to think that our way is the best way, but it's actually the worst. Even in the text of the game, Rules of Law, it refers to the consequences of crimes as punishment. We ignore restorative justice, rehabilitation, or even looking at the root cause of crime. We are reactive to it, and it's no wonder reactionaries control the conversation about it. So have you been thinking about a law that you want to create in your new society? The Ben Robbins game asks you to explain the law. What is it trying to forbid? Or, in something that we don't think about as much, what does the law require you to do? And what kind of law did you have in mind? Something basic? Maybe something esoteric? Talking is outlawed in the movie theater. You cannot kill another person. You cannot add the letters ESQ to the end of your name upon becoming an attorney. That, my friends, is merely the first step. The next steps are not up to you. You see, others can decide the following questions. What is the punishment for violation of the law? Do people think that the law is just? So on and so forth. See, you're in a society, and as such, you are not the only person who gets to decide the specifics of the law or how the society interacts with that law. Is it going to be a silly law that isn't enforced and no one follows? Or is it a law that is gravely enforced and no one breaks it? Is it a law that the society feels is unjust to the core? Do they protest? Is it enough to spark discontent into a blazing revolution? There is no game master in Rules of Law. The group plays as both lawmakers and judges. Is the society that you build like ours? One where the powerful insulate themselves and ensure their continued dominance, where the law is a tool for oppression? Or is it a society where the law is a tool for egalitarian principles? Do the people corrupt it into something else? That's part of the power of role-playing games. I'm not here saying that Dungeons & Dragons can make you a better person because you live in someone else's shoes and therefore learn empathy. I know a lot of terrible people who play role-playing games, many of which who comment on my videos. They don't even view me as an actual human being. They don't attempt to talk to me like one. They don't listen. Look, I love the Dragon game. It has its own limitations, and ultimately, it's a fun game about killing monsters and going on adventures. But Dungeons & Dragons is not the only role-playing game. It is a role-playing game. Games like Rules of Law have no dice, no character sheets, no cards to play, no dungeon master, no math, and really, no mechanics. You play as a role you don't have in the real world, and you just play it out. And through that, it can teach you something. And sometimes, what it teaches you is that there is a lie that we dress up as an immutable part of our society. And that's just paper and illusion.
Will Foster returned to Oklahoma in 2019. He can grow cannabis legally now, since the legalization of medical cannabis in the state in 2018. Additionally, one of the police officers who executed that warrant in 1995 was serving a 10-year prison sentence for corruption, including, surprise, surprise, fabricated drug buys, coached informants, and the theft of drugs and cash. That led to the illegal incarceration of 30 people. And another 15 people had their cases dismissed when the corruption was discovered. The police officer received 10 years for all that, when Will Foster received 93 years for cultivation with the intent to distribute. Will Foster's crime harmed no one. In 2008, the worldwide financial system showed its frailty. We got a peek behind the curtain and saw the lie for what it was. And for those paying attention, we saw a peek behind the curtain in the legal system as well, and saw the lie for what it was. Politics, justice, war, wealth, all have been exposed in this information age. But here we are, still sitting here, being fed the false story. And a large portion of the world still believes it. There is what it can be and what it is. As we are distracted by folks placing the blame on those who have no power, so we forget that the person behind the curtain might not be the great and powerful Oz, but they still rule the Emerald City. I still believe in people. I haven't lost that yet, and I cling to it tightly. As MLK said when he was paraphrasing Theodore Parker, the arc of the moral universe is long, and it bends towards justice. I take heart in the fact that he said justice, and not the law. Thanks for watching.